We're going to take a deep dive into Pharaoh's dreams and how they, well, basically shaped ancient Egypt.
Yeah, it's, this really interesting intersection of spirituality and leadership. And of course, you always have that touch of ancient mystery. We'll be focusing on excerpts from Genesis 41.
Okay.
Which, as you know, revolves around Pharaoh's troubling dreams, their interpretation by Joseph, and all the events that happened afterward.
So, I mean, we all kind of know the story of how Pharaoh has these super vivid dreams and none of his advisors can figure them out.
Right.
And that's where Joseph enters the picture. He kind of embodies this idea of resilience and wisdom, rising from prisoner to almost like running a whole nation. But let's kind of unpack this a bit. What's really going on here?
Well, let's start with those dreams. So in the first dream, there are these 7 healthy cows grazing by the Nile when suddenly 7 really scrawny cows show up and just devour them, the healthy ones. It's pretty unsettling imagery, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, definitely not a dream you want to have before like a big presentation or something.
Right.
And then, as if that wasn't enough, Pharaoh has this second dream with like a similar thing. You've got these 7 like robust golden heads of grain, and all of a sudden they're consumed by 7 withered, thin stalks. It's like a buffet of bad omens.
Exactly, and the repetition, right?
Yeah.
The repetition of this theme of, the healthy being overtaken, overwhelmed by the unhealthy. It really suggests this impending sense of doom, of fear that the good times are about to come to a screeching halt.
So how did people in ancient Egypt typically interpret dreams? Were they seen as just like random firings of the brain, or was there like a deeper meaning attached to them?
Oh no, dreams were completely intertwined with spirituality in ancient Egypt. They were considered messages from the divine, often containing prophecies or warnings.
Okay.
It was believed that skilled interpreters could actually decipher these messages and then, advise the dreamer on what to do.
That makes a lot of sense, considering like Pharaoh's reaction to his dreams.
Right.
He's understandably freaked out, right, by all this crazy imagery, and he like immediately calls in his dream team, the magicians and wise men of Egypt. But there's a catch. None of them can figure out what these dreams mean.
Yeah.
It's a complete enigma.
Total enigma.
And that leaves Pharaoh even more trouble.
Oh, absolutely. And this failure, right, of his most trusted advisors, it highlights this profound sense of helplessness that Pharaoh must have felt. Imagine being the most powerful person in the land, and yet you're totally unable to understand this message that seems so clearly related to your kingdom's future.
It would be
totally terrifying.
Yeah. You'd be like looking over your shoulder all the time, like, when is this disaster going to strike?
Exactly. And it's in this moment of complete desperation, that the cupbearer, who, remember, had been imprisoned with Joseph,
right,
suddenly remembers Joseph and his ability to interpret dreams.
It's almost like divine intervention, wouldn't you say? The timing is just too perfect.
Yeah, it's really something.
Here's Pharaoh at his wit's end, and suddenly, boom, someone appears who just might be able to help.
Yeah.
It's almost too good to be true.
It makes you wonder about the role of fate in all of this.
Yeah.
Was it just a coincidence, or was there some kind of higher power orchestrating all these events?
So Pharaoh summons Joseph from prison. Can you paint a picture of this scene for us? What do you imagine it was like?
Well, imagine, right, the grandeur of the Egyptian court, the imposing figure of the Pharaoh on his throne, all the gold, all the finery, and then Joseph enters, probably still bearing the marks of his imprisonment, and he's just standing there before the most powerful man in Egypt.
It's like a total contrast, right?
A stark contrast, absolutely.
Filled with this like tension and anticipation.
Exactly, yeah.
And Joseph, ever humble, makes it clear that it's not his power at work here. He says to Pharaoh, "It is not in me. God will give Pharaoh an answer of peace." It's almost like saying, like, buckle up, Pharaoh, because we're about to get some serious divine insight.
Exactly. Joseph positions himself as this conduit, this vessel for God's message. And this not only, underscores his piety, but it really elevates the significance of the interpretation that's about to come. It's no longer just a dream, it's a divine prophecy.
Yeah, and that prophecy is pretty stark, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
Joseph lays it out, the 7 good cows and the healthy grain stalks. Those represent 7 years of incredible abundance and prosperity for Egypt. But then there's a twist. The scrawny cows and the withered stalks, those represent 7 years of devastating famine that are going to follow. It's this like roller coaster of emotions,
Yeah.
you know,
Yes.
a glimpse of hope and then this chilling prediction of hardship. And the fact that the dream was repeated, I mean, it really emphasizes this sense of inevitability, you know?
Absolutely, yeah.
Like, this isn't just a possibility.
Be certainty, yeah.
It's going to happen. Talk about pressure. So what does Pharaoh do with this potentially catastrophic news? Does he, like, fall apart?
You know, surprisingly, no.
Oh.
He seems to accept Joseph's interpretation, and he recognizes just how serious the situation is. But now he's faced with an even bigger problem. How to prepare for this huge shift from plenty to famine. It's a logistical nightmare, a real test of leadership on a massive scale.
And that's really where we start to see Joseph's strategic genius.
Yes.
He doesn't just interpret the dream.
Right.
He offers a solution. This meticulously crafted plan to stockpile grain during the 7 good years. It's proactive and dare I say brilliant.
Oh, it is.
He's not just reacting to this crisis. He's anticipating it and putting these measures in place to lessen the impact.
Absolutely. Joseph's plan is really a testament to his foresight and his understanding of how to manage resources. He essentially lays out this blueprint for national preparedness, and it's something that has resonated with leaders throughout history.
Okay, so let's break this plan down a little bit. How does Joseph envision this massive grain-saving operation actually working?
Okay, so he tells Pharaoh, "Let Pharaoh select a discerning and wise man and set him over the land of Egypt to appoint overseers over the land and to take 1/5 of the produce of the land of Egypt during the 7 plentiful years."
Right.
So it's very systematic, a coordinated effort to collect and store this grain strategically throughout the whole kingdom.
But wait, wouldn't collecting 1/5 of all the produce, I mean, wouldn't that create a shortage even during the good years?
Right.
Wouldn't people feel the impact even before the famine hits?
That's a really good question, and it really speaks to the potential social and economic implications of this plan.
Right.
I mean, it would require a significant amount of trust and cooperation from all the Egyptian people.
Right.
They need to accept this temporary reduction in their abundance in order to safeguard their future.
So in a way, Joseph's plan is not just a logistical challenge, but also a test of how unified the society is, how cohesive. It requires this like collective understanding of this threat and a willingness to make sacrifices for the common good.
Exactly. And it highlights the importance of communication and leadership in times of crisis. Pharaoh would need to convince his people that this is absolutely necessary, this plan, and ensure that the burden is shared fairly.
So what happens next? Does Pharaoh embrace this radical idea?
He does. And in fact, he is so impressed with Joseph's insight and his plan that he makes a remarkable decision. He promotes Joseph, and remember this is a former prisoner,
Yes.
the second in command of all of Egypt.
That's a huge jump. Talk about a career change. He goes from prison garb to wearing fine linen robes and a gold chain, and he even gets a new Egyptian name, Zaphenath-Paneah.
It's this extraordinary act, really symbolic of the trust that Pharaoh put in Joseph. And he's essentially saying, look, I'm putting the fate of my entire kingdom in your hands. You're the man with the plan.
But wouldn't this have caused some problems with the Egyptian court?
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, imagine being a high-ranking official, loyal to Pharaoh for years, and then suddenly this foreigner comes in and takes this position of power second only to Pharaoh himself.
You're absolutely right. I mean, it must have created a lot of tension, resentment even among the Egyptian elite. They probably questioned Pharaoh's judgment, and maybe even saw Joseph's promotion as a threat to their own power and influence.
So this crisis didn't just bring about like a practical solution, a plan to survive the famine, but it also like shook up the existing power structures of Egypt.
Absolutely.
It forced this reassessment of who held authority and why.
Precisely. And it's fascinating to think about this in the context of leadership. Sometimes the most effective leaders are the ones who are willing to break with tradition, to challenge what everyone's used to, even if it means facing resistance from those who are already in power.
So Pharaoh basically gives Joseph the go-ahead to put his plan into action. What were some of the logistical challenges they faced in actually collecting and storing so much grain?
Well, remember, this is ancient Egypt.
Yeah,
They didn't have the sophisticated transportation and communication systems that we have today.
right.
Everything had to be done manually, relying on manpower, animal transport, and of course the Nile River.
It must have been a huge undertaking, coordinating the collection from fields across the entire kingdom
Yeah.
and making sure the grain was stored properly and protected from the weather and pests. I mean, did they just like stack it up in giant piles, or were there like special buildings for grain storage?
They did have specialized structures, actually. Archaeologists have found the remains of ancient granaries in Egypt, that these massive structures that were built to preserve grain for really long periods of time. Some of them were even underground, taking advantage of the natural coolness and dryness to keep the grain from spoiling.
Wow. That's incredible. It really shows their understanding of long-term planning and resource management. They weren't just thinking about the immediate crisis. They were building for the future, ensuring the survival of their entire civilization.
Exactly. And this idea of planning for the long term, of investing in resilience, I mean, it's just as relevant today as it was back then.
Right.
We're facing our own set of challenges. Climate change, resource scarcity, political instability, and Joseph's story is this powerful reminder of the importance of foresight and preparedness.
So the years of plenty go by and the famine hits.
Right.
And it doesn't just hit Egypt, it hits the surrounding nations too. What was the impact of this widespread famine on the people who hadn't prepared?
The impact was devastating. People were starving. There was social unrest and political upheaval. It was a time of immense suffering. But Egypt, because of Joseph's foresight, was in a very different position.
They had a lifeline. They had that storehouse of grain that could get them through the tough times.
Right.
But did they keep it all for themselves?
Well,
Or did they share their bounty with others?
Word spread that Egypt actually had grain to spare.
Oh, wow.
And soon, people from all the neighboring countries, desperate to survive, they started arriving in Egypt looking to buy grain from Joseph.
So Joseph, who was once a prisoner, a foreigner in a strange land, becomes this global savior.
He does, yeah.
His actions don't just impact Egypt, they impact, the wider world. He's like the ancient world's version of a humanitarian aid worker.
It's a remarkable transformation, isn't it?
It is.
And it really highlights the interconnectedness of human societies. I mean, even back then, people were impacted by events happening far beyond their own borders. And in times of crisis, cooperation, sharing resources, I mean, that becomes absolutely essential for survival.
This idea of Egypt as this beacon of hope, this source of sustenance for people in need, it raises this really interesting question. How did this newfound role, this position of power and influence, how did it affect Egypt's relationships with other nations? That's a great question.
Yeah.
And something that we'll definitely dig into deeper as we continue our deep dive. But for now, let's maybe shift our focus to the internal dynamics within Egypt.
Okay.
How did this crisis and Joseph's rise to power, how did it affect the lives of, everyday Egyptians?
All right, let's explore that. We know Joseph's plan involved collecting, a fifth of all the produce during the good years. What effect did that have on the people?
Well, it's likely that people felt the effects of this policy.
Yeah.
They might have experienced a slight reduction in their own abundance, maybe even a rise in prices for certain goods.
So even though the famine hadn't hit yet, there was still this sense of sacrifice required. Like they had to tighten their belts in anticipation of this hardship that was coming. Did they understand why this was necessary, or was there resistance to this policy?
It's hard to know for certain, but you can imagine that there was probably some grumbling, some questioning of Pharaoh's decisions. I mean, after all, they were being asked to give up a portion of their well-being for a future threat that hadn't even happened yet.
It's this classic challenge for leaders, right? Balancing the needs of the present with the demands of the future.
Absolutely.
It requires a lot of trust. The people have to believe that the sacrifices that they're making are really necessary for the greater good.
And it also highlights just how important communication is. Pharaoh and Joseph would have had to really explain the reasons behind this policy, to reassure the people that their sacrifices wouldn't be in vain. They needed to build this sense of shared purpose, a collective understanding of the danger that they were facing together.
So it wasn't just about, stockpiling the grain. It was about managing expectations, beating consensus, and maintaining unity, keeping the society together in the face of this looming crisis.
Absolutely.
That's a pretty tall order.
It is, yeah. And it really speaks to the complexity of leadership, especially during those times of uncertainty and change. It's not just about making the decisions, but about building trust, giving people hope, and guiding them through difficult times.
Now let's shift our focus to what happened after the famine.
Okay.
We know that Egypt survived because of Joseph's plan, but how did this whole experience actually change them as a society?
Yeah, it's fascinating to think about how this whole event might have reshaped Egypt, both internally and on the world stage. It wasn't just a temporary thing. It had the potential to really fundamentally change the course of their civilization.
Okay, so let's start with the internal dynamics. Pharaoh basically handed over a huge amount of his authority to Joseph, who, was a foreigner.
Right.
Did this shift in power, did it have lasting effects on the political landscape of Egypt?
It's hard to imagine that it didn't. I mean, by putting Joseph in such a prominent position, Pharaoh really disrupted the traditional power structure.
Yeah.
It potentially sidelined those who were already in power, and it created this new center of power in the court.
Yeah, I can only imagine the whispers going around, the courtiers kind of grumbling, who is this outsider, and why does Pharaoh trust him so much?
Exactly.
Yeah.
It probably created a lot of tension and rivalry, maybe even set the stage for future conflicts.
Yeah.
But it also showed a willingness to adapt, to be open to new ideas and new leadership, especially when faced with these kinds of huge challenges.
So this crisis might have actually pushed Egypt toward a more meritocratic system,
Yeah.
where competence and results were valued more than just traditional hierarchies. It's a fascinating idea that a period of really extreme hardship could lead to some positive political changes.
It definitely challenges the idea that crises always lead to bad things, to regression.
Right.
Sometimes they force us to reevaluate our assumptions, to break free from old, outdated structures and embrace new ways of doing things.
Okay, so now let's think about the social fabric of Egypt. Joseph's plan, it involved collecting a fifth of the produce during the good years.
Right.
Did this policy have lasting effects on the relationship between the pharaoh and his people?
Well, this centralized control over resources, it might have strengthened the pharaoh's authority, but it also, put more responsibility on him to make sure that those resources were managed, fairly and effectively.
Right.
The people would expect, demand even a certain level of accountability and transparency from their leader.
So it's like this crisis might have actually fostered a new social contract between the ruler and the people.
Right.
One that was based on a greater sense of shared responsibility and interdependence.
Yeah, that's a really good point. It suggests that even in these ancient societies, crises could lead to a shift toward more participatory forms of government.
Right.
Where the people actually had a say in the decisions that affected their lives.
Okay, so we've got potential political shifts, maybe a change in how society works. Now let's zoom out to the whole region.
Mm.
How did Egypt successfully surviving this famine? How did it change their relationship with their neighbors?
This is where things get really interesting. Remember, the famine didn't just hit Egypt; it affected the whole area.
Right.
But Egypt, thanks to Joseph, was the only one that was prepared.
Yeah, they became this symbol of hope, a literal source of food for those who were just trying to stay alive.
Exactly, and this put Egypt in a position of real power and influence, unlike anything they'd seen before. They could set the terms of trade, they could use their extra grain to form new alliances, and they could even, put political pressure on weaker nations.
So in a way, this crisis transformed Egypt. It went from being just one of the players in the region to a dominant force, like a center of power in the ancient world.
Exactly, and this new status, it had implications that lasted far beyond the immediate aftermath of the famine. It shaped Egypt's foreign policy, its economy, and even its cultural identity for generations.
It's just incredible to think about how Pharaoh's dreams, these seemingly random visions, they started this chain of events that not only saved Egypt, but actually changed its whole destiny.
Yeah.
It really shows us that crises, while they're, undeniably tough, they can also be opportunities for huge change.
Right.
Leading to unexpected and often good outcomes.
It's a testament to human resilience, to our ingenuity and to our ability to adapt and come up with new ideas when we're faced with really tough situations. And maybe it offers a little bit of hope for us today, as we deal with our own global challenges. We can look to Joseph's story and remember that even in the darkest of times, there's always the potential for finding solutions, making positive changes, and creating a better future.
And on that really thought-provoking note, we're gonna wrap up our deep dive into the story of Joseph. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep diving deep.